Hi, so we're gonna talk about Barrett Touchman's book, The Guns of August. Okay, so let's do this very quick and let's try to summarize it with the most information as possible. Okay then, Barrett Touchman begins his monumental treatment of World War One in May of 1910 at the funeral of Edward VII of England. Virtually all the royalty of the world had gathered in London for the funeral, and she uses this meeting to set the stage for what was to follow. I was immediately brought up short to realize that it was less than 100 years from today that the world was still almost entirely controlled by emperors, kings, queens, and other royalty. Only 3 prominent diplomats at Edward's funeral were non-royalty. One of them, former U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, came home from that funeral convinced there was going to be war in Europe. The gathering troubles centered on Germany and its leader Kaiser Wilhelm, whom Dutchman chooses to call William, or Willie. He and his military advisers were convinced that most of Europe was amassing power against it and encircling it. A crushing blow had been Edward's alliance with France, concluded only a month before his death. At the east, William, I will follow Dutchman's show in these notes, Willie wanted a non-aggression pact with Russia, but it would have violated a similar pact Russia had made with France, and thus the Tsar refused. By 1906, Germany had developed a twofold strategy. On the one hand, it had been building a massive navy for some years, and on land it was planning to have a surprise strike on France leading to an encirclement. The plan was to do that as quickly as possible, knowing it would take Russia some time to respond to honor its pact with France, and Germany did not want to get into a two-front war, remembering how it destroyed Napoleon. What stood dangerously in the way was Belgium, a small, nearly defenseless nation. It had been made a neutral state back in 1839. This independence was agreed upon by all European nations, and that agreement was strongly supported by England. However, a direct frontal attack on France seemed impossible since the Alsace-Lorraine front had been heavily fortified after the 1870 European War. Thus, Germany was planning to risk the violation of Belgium's neutrality and to invade France in a lightning attack through that corridor. The German plan did include a frontal attack at Alsace-Lorraine, but that was more to do the French to a huge defense in that area, while the Germans would march quickly west through Belgium to the English Channel. Then, having France in a semicircle, the Germans would move quickly south from Belgium to take France. They expected to complete the war and win Paris within 39 days. If this were achieved, then the Germans would quickly turn their attention back to the Eastern Front, where the Russians would soon be ready for war. The stage was set for a terrible war. Yet Dutchman is convinced that the mindset of each participant nation was critical. Counter his fate, the Greeks believed. 100 years of German philosophy went into the making of this decision, in which the seed of self-destruction lay embedded, waiting for its hour. The voice was Schlieffen's, the general who concocted the attack plan. But the hand was the hand of Fichte, who saw the German people chosen by Providence to occupy the supreme place in the history of the universe, of Hegel, who saw them leading the war to a glorious destiny of Kampfstelle Kultur, of Nietzsche, who told them that Superman, Übermensch, were above ordinary controls, of Treitschke, who said the increase of power as the highest moral duty of the state, of the whole German people, who called the Templar ruler the all-highest. What made the Schlieffen plan was not Clausewitz, and not the Battle of Cannae either, but the body of accumulated egoism which suckled the German people and created a nation fed on the desperate delusion of the world that deems itself absolute. This plan they had was created as early as 1899. justifying the need to violate Belgium. The one that willed war more than the other could not help but will the violation of Belgian neutrality. The plan called for a 39-day war from the day of invasion until the surrender of Paris. The French had their own view of the world, which involved a nearly void optimism, which called for long encouraged offense. If one believes in oneself and attacks, no one cannot lose. Thus they didn't want to defend the Belgian west and northern border and the middle and west. Rather, they wanted to attack Germany at Alsace-Lorraine and break through to sever the German army, which would be rushing to encircle the north and come south in a giant wave. The French were aware of the German plan, but believed this surprise and daring offensive would split the German power, interrupt supply lines, and weaken their power. The French and British were devising joint plans from 1905 onward, but often not very seriously. Would the British fight? Here and chilling realpolitik existed as well. When French General Foch was asked, "What is the smallest British military force that would be of any practical assistance to you?" Foch replies, "A single British soldier, and we will see to it that he is killed." However, the British got serious in 1910, when General Henry Olsen took over. He was a good friend of General Ferdinand Foch of France. Russia had recently performed poorly against Japan in war, and thus this encouraged the Germans. The Russians were harmed by the weakness of Tsar Nicholas II, or Niki, and their Minister of War, General Sukhomlinov, who scolded a meeting of Staff College instructors for interest in such an invasion as a factor of firepower against the saber-lanced bayonet charge. He bragged about not having read a military manual for the last 25 years. However, there was some hope of Russia as an ally because of Grand Duke Niki, who was competent and bright. For some years this was called the German War, yet, despite the German plan, which was to begin the war by the beginning of September 1914, the war began not with Germany and an attack on France, but after June 18, 1914, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by Serbian nationalists. By August 1st, 1914, the war was declared by Austria and Serbia, and Germany immediately joined in the war, declaring against France and Russia declared war on Germany and Austria. For a short while, England stayed out of the war. General von Moltke was Chief of Staff for Germany, and all was carefully set on the soon-to-be Western Front. However, the quick data faction had set the German plans in some turmoil. Barbara Tuchman wrote a masterful book of some 600 pages, which concerns itself with the first 30 days of the war in the West. Basically, she argues that the fact that the French, with their weak allies, held off the march on Paris and turned the war into a war of trench warfare made the difference between defeat and eventual triumph. In this book, there is almost nothing about the war in the East, either between Austria and Serbia, and even very little about the Russian advance in Germany on the East. This is the story of the founding of the Western Front. The German plan began to run into trouble before it was ever set in motion. Germany sent an ultimatum to the Belgian government on August 2nd. If they cooperated with the violation of their neutrality, protected by a treaty with all the eventual belligerents, then Germany would spare Belgium, and even then, after the war, would pay reparations for any damages done to Belgium. However, the Belgians had not trusted all the Germans, and it turned out to be with good reason. In relation to Germany's ultimatum of August 2nd, the Belgian minister said, "If we are to be crushed, let us be crushed gloriously." By August 5th, the Germans attacked Liege, and war was on. The Germans had a powerful war machine with terrible new giant guns never known before in war, and they marched with a huge army to Belgium, using tactics of terror and murder of civilians as they moved. Yet the Belgians heroically resisted. Resisted, yes, bit of an overprice in death and destruction, yes, but delayed the German war machine very little. Yet, Dutchman points out, what Belgium gave the Allies was neither 2 days nor 2 weeks, but a cause and an example. In Dutchman's gripping account, the first month of the war may have been divided into 3 periods. The Battle of the Frontiers, which was most of the month. This was a period of the German violation of Belgian territory, the taking of Belgium, the introduction of terror, which alienated much of the world, the destruction of much of Belgium, and some of northern France, and the terrible destruction of Louvain. People saw significance in the burning of the famous Library of Louvain as something beyond the pale of civilized people. The burning of the library at Louvain, said the Daily Chronicle, meant war not only on non-combatants, but on posterity to the most generations. The second phase was to turn south, and the German march toward Paris. The ultimate failure of that march led to the establishment of trench warfare, which defined the Western Front for the rest of the war. 4 more long years of massive casualties. The first month of the war was the start of pig-headed generals, of all belligerents sticking to plans made in the abstract and not working in fact. If either side didn't decisively lose the war in the first month, it was because of absurd mistakes by the opposition, and not because of the carefully crafted plans. There were no exceptions to the notion that each player in the war did some very dumb things in the first month. The Germans seemed to do fewer of them than the others, but with greater consequence. The primary factor was the introduction of terror against the civilian population, as it would take any town if there was a sort of resistance of the local population, shooting at the baited soldiers, sabotage of roads, railways or bridges, cutting off communication lines, destruction of food supplies, anything. Then the Germans would line up people in the local villages, shoot many of them as an example, and increase the numbers if others tried resistance. This not only increased the will of the Belgian people to resist, but alarmed the whole world against these tactics of German warfare. A second mistake that turned out to be quite important was that they were moving through Belgium with some pace, and began to think they would get things back on schedule despite Belgian resistance, and thus they sent 3 divisions of soldiers away from the Western Front to the east to help resist the weak Russian attack at Tannberg. Dutchman's assessment of the Russians was they entered the war without confidence and remained in it without faith. A third severe mistake in that first month was that the Germans, who had built a significant navy just for this war, was that the German navy stayed holed up and used almost exclusively in August to patrol against Russian incursion. England was terrified at any prospect of losing sea superiority which it had over the rest of the world and needed. It was totally sea-dependent for everything, including food. The Germans passed up a critical opportunity to engage the British fleet and cripple English supply lines from the world. The French were so with their plans to attack the German centre at Alsace-Lorraine that they let the encirclement by the Germans grow so strong, ceding the Germans a huge area of French northern territory where there was heavy manufacturing and great bands of agriculture that they greatly disadvantaged themselves. The British couldn't really get themselves committed to the war. In that month of August 1914, the British faced a severe mutiny in Northern Ireland. Since the Irish problem was possible to flare up again at any time, it made any British nervous that would send too large an army to Europe. Thus, they joined the Allies, but with half a heart and always wanted to be defensive of casualties. The United States was extremely slow to realize the significance of the war and to join the Allied cause. President Wilson wanted to stay out of the war so the U.S. could play a power role as a savior of the war diplomacy and economic power after the war, which he assumed would be short. Eventually, despite these wishes, conditions would allow the United States to remain neutral. The Russians were just so disorganized and unprepared that they took much too long to get seriously into the war to matter much in that first month. Overall, all belligerents except the Germans had developed new fighting tools, huge guns, machine guns, and airplanes, and tried in the first month of the war to fight their 19th century wand of cavalry and bayonet charges, all of which were easily cut down by machine gun fire and giant cannons. Bum! As September came, it finally became clear to the French that an attacking position was insane, and that they didn't quickly change it into a defensive posture, Paris would fall in days. It was General Gallieni who decided to the trench warfare to defend Paris. After a decisive battle after Mons, a French counterattack which drove the Germans back, the French settled into defensive trenches. Gallieni constructed an arm of deep trenches about 20 miles around Paris. These began to hold, and soon the Germans were behind their own trenches as well. In the decisive battle after Mons, 6,000 French reinforcements were rushed to the front from a Paris train station by taxis. The war remembers the battle represented by the taxis. 100 of them were already in the service of the military government of Paris, and 500 more, each carrying 5 soldiers, making the 60-kilometer trip to war twice. General Clergy figured he could transport 6,000 troops in a hard-pressed front. Running from Switzerland to the Channel like a Congress route across the French and Belgian territory, the trenches determined the war of precision and attrition, the brutal, mud-filled, murderous insanity known as the Western Front that was to last for 4 more years. And well, this is how the First World War or the Great War begins, with a few incidents that weren't supposed to happen, but in the end, a war was made. So I hope we'll be able to see more about the First World War, because this was just the beginning of the war. Okay then, see you later some other time. Bye bye.